I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president's lie sent armed officers to my garage, with the governor at my side. And her excuse, she said I had bombs and rifles. Little did she know, I'd be the one keeping the law when the governor went down. Let me start at the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where you're listening from today. My garage is my church. It's the one place on earth where everything makes perfect sense. Every wrench has a home on the pegboard, outlined in black marker. Every socket is nestled in its foam tray, from smallest to largest. The floor is clean enough to eat off of, except for that one stubborn little puddle of synthetic oil I'd missed under the engine block of my '67 Mustang. The car is my pride, a deep, glossy Highland green. It smells of leather and gasoline, and a little bit of my dad, who left it to me. On that particular evening, the cool lake air was just starting to drift in, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I was torquing the lug nuts, listening to the satisfying click, click, click of the wrench. It was a rhythm of order, of control, a rhythm the world outside my garage door seemed to have forgotten. That's when the quiet hum of an expensive sedan broke the peace. Not the sound of a neighbor coming home late. This was a deeper, more serious sound. I wiped my hands on a red shop rag and peered out the side window. A black car with government plates was rolling to a stop at the end of my driveway. Two men in dark suits got out. They moved with a quiet snap that made the hairs on my arm stand up. One stayed by the car, his eyes scanning everything. The other walked toward the garage. He wasn't big or scary, just alert. He looked like a man who noticed things for a living. I met him at the edge of the open garage door. Before he could speak, I knew. The meeting. I'd sent the files 2 weeks ago, through a channel I was promised was secure. A simple manila envelope filled with photocopied invoices, altered parcel maps, and bank statements. Proof. Proof that our idyllic lakeside community was built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated greed, orchestrated by our HOA president, Karen Paulson, and her developer friend. "Mr. Dunham," the agent said. His voice was low. "That's me," I said, keeping my own voice even. "I'm Agent Peters. This is Agent Cross." He nodded back toward the car. "Governor Thompson would like a word with you. He's reviewing your materials. Garage was chosen for privacy. No HOA cameras, no clubhouse mics, no neighbors." My heart did a little jump. The governor himself. I'd hoped for an investigator from the Attorney General's office, maybe a state auditor. The governor showing up in person meant this was bigger than I ever imagined. The back door of the sedan opened, and a man I recognized from the news stepped out. Governor Thompson. He looked older in person, tired, but he gave me a firm, appreciative nod. A plainclothes agent already stood inside my garage, posted by the tool chest, eyes on the driveway. He held up a thin briefcase. My evidence. "Mr. Dunham," he said, his voice carrying easily in the still night air. "You've been busy. I think you've untangled something we've been chasing for years." He started walking toward me, a small, genuine smile on his face. This was good. This was the moment the balance was about to shift. The moment a careful man, with a clean garage and good records, could finally prove that the rules should apply to everyone. Then the world exploded in red and blue light. Patrol cars screamed into our quiet cul-de-sac, tires howling on the pavement. They blocked the driveway, their headlights pinning us like insects against the bright white of my garage interior. Doors flew open, officers poured out, hands on their holsters, shouting commands that overlapped into a wall of noise. "Show me your hands! On the ground now! Don't move!" A sergeant barked from behind a headlight glare, reading off his slate. "Caller says he'll open the garage and ambush officers." A beat. Possible bombs, then lower. High-risk response. Lethal cover if he won't comply. My stomach dropped. They were primed to shoot me for opening my own door. I saw my wife, Tina, appear in the doorway that led to the house, her face a mask of confusion and fear. The lead agent and the medic moved instantly, flanking the governor, weapons low, bodies shielding him. They were calm. The local cops were not. "This is a misunderstanding," Agent Peters yelled, holding up his badge. "We are State Protection Detail. Stand down." But the local officers were too amped up. They saw a man in a suit, another man in a garage, and a third man who looked important. And they saw a threat. They'd been primed for one. I knew with a sinking certainty who had primed them: Karen. This had her fingerprints all over it. Last week she'd cited me for a fence too tall and a garage door open past quiet hours. Petty rules, weaponized. Tonight she upgraded pettiness to bombs and rifles. A young officer fresh from the academy was in the lead. His eyes were wide, his face slick with sweat under the flashing lights. He was shouting the loudest, his pistol gripped tight in a two-handed stance. He took a step forward, then another, moving from the asphalt of the driveway onto the smooth, sealed concrete of my garage floor. He took one more aggressive step, his boot landing squarely in that small, almost invisible puddle of synthetic oil. Time seemed to slow down. His boot didn't just slip, it shot out from under him, his arms pinwheeled, his body twisting in a frantic, useless effort to stay upright. His boot scraped. Grip squealed. His finger hunted for balance and found the trigger wall instead. Air thinned. Even the sirens held their breath. The shout on his lips turned into a grunt of surprise. And the trigger broke. The crack of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Metal rang, lights strobed, breath stopped. It wasn't a boom, it was a sharp piercing crack that echoed off my tool chests and the steel body of the Mustang. Then Governor Thompson made a small noise, a soft grunt, and his hand went to his side. He stumbled back a step, his knees buckling. Agent Peters caught him, lowering him gently to the ground. The front of the governor's crisp white shirt was suddenly, horribly blooming with red. Karen's hands flew to her head like cables got cut. She didn't scream, she just stalled, mouth open, eyes wide, stone cold frozen. Across the driveway, I saw her, Karen Paulson. She was standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, her phone still in her hand, a smug, triumphant look on her face. She had come out to watch the show. Earlier that day she'd sniffed, "People like you drag down property values." Tonight, her values bled red on my floor. She came to see me, Josh Dunham, the neighbor who dared to question her, get taken down. But as the governor went down, as the agent swarmed him, her expression changed. The smugness evaporated. Her jaw went slack. Her eyes widened, and all the color drained from her face. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at the man bleeding out on my garage floor. She hadn't just called the cops on her annoying neighbor. She had, through a toxic cocktail of arrogance and lies, just orchestrated the shooting of the most powerful man in the state. And from the look on her face, I knew she understood that her entire world had just come to an end, right here, in the oily, blood-spattered entrance to my perfectly organized garage. The game was over, but a far more dangerous one was just about to begin. The immediate aftermath of the gunshot was a symphony of chaos, but with two very different conductors. The local patrol officers, led by the rookie who had fired the shot, were a mess of panicked shouting and conflicting orders. The kid himself looked like he'd seen a ghost. His face was pale, his weapon now hanging limply at his side as he stared at the growing stain on the governor's shirt. He kept mumbling, "I slipped. Oh God, I slipped." He looked 19 and ruined. I hated Karen for making him the match. The other officers were yelling, trying to secure a scene that had blown past their control. They were trained for traffic stops and domestic disputes, not for this. Not for a potential assassination attempt happening in a suburban garage. Their energy was frantic, loud, and completely unproductive. They were adding noise, not solutions. In stark contrast, the governor's protection detail moved with a chilling, silent precision. Agent Peters was already on his radio, his voice a low, urgent monotone. "Shots fired, officer involved. Eagle is down. I repeat, Eagle is down. Lakeside cabin on Willow Creek Lane. We need a medevac now. Secure the perimeter. No one in or out Eagle." The medic was already kneeling beside the governor, his hands moving with practiced speed. He had a medical kit out of nowhere, a small, tactical black bag that he'd ripped open. He was cutting away the governor's shirt, exposing the wound. It was high on the left side, just below the rib cage. It was bleeding badly. The blood was dark against the clean concrete floor, a stark, ugly contrast to the neatness of my garage. "Sir, stay with me." "Governor, can you hear me?" the medic said, his voice calm but firm, trying to keep Governor Thompson conscious. The governor's eyes were open, but they were glassy with shock. He grimaced, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. My brain did math. The floor, the governor, bleeding. Karen lit the match. The clash between the two law enforcement groups came to a head almost immediately. The senior patrol officer, a sergeant with a thick mustache and a thicker gut, started striding toward the scene. "All right, everybody back up! This is my scene!" he boomed, his voice full of an authority he no longer possessed. Agent Peters, who was still on his radio, didn't even look at him. He simply held up a hand, a universal sign for stop, and said, "Negative. This is a state crime scene under the jurisdiction of the Governor's Protection Detail. Your men will form a perimeter and await the arrival of the state police. That's it." The sergeant puffed out his chest, his face turning red under the flashing lights. "Now you listen here," he started, but was cut off. The medic looked up from his work on the governor, his eyes like ice chips. "Sergeant," he said, his voice quiet but carrying more weight than all the shouting. "You have an officer who just discharged his weapon and wounded the governor of this state. Every second you waste arguing with us is another second he bleeds. Do you want to be the man who explains that to the Attorney General, or do you want to be the man who helps save his life? Secure the perimeter, now." The sergeant's bluster deflated like a cheap balloon. He looked at the governor, then at the hard-faced agent, and finally at his own shell-shocked rookie. He made the right choice. He turned to his men and started barking orders, pulling them back, setting up a wide circle around my garage. I was still standing there, frozen, useless, a bystander in my own home. Tina was in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. The neighbors were starting to creep out of their houses, drawn by the sirens and the gunshot. I could see neighbor Ed, a retired accountant who spent most of his days documenting bylaw infractions, peering from behind his perfectly trimmed hedges. They were all about to get the show of a lifetime. The medic was working fast, but he needed more hands. The wound was pumping blood with every beat of the governor's struggling heart. He packed the entry wound with gauze, but he needed to apply serious, direct pressure. He looked up, his eyes scanning for anyone useful. The patrol cops were too rattled. Agent Peters was coordinating the response. The medic's eyes landed on me. He saw my clean hands, my organized workspace, my calm demeanor. A man who knew how to follow instructions. The medic pointed a bloody gloved finger directly at me. It felt like a laser beam. "You," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I need you. Your hands. Get over here. Now." My feet felt like lead, but I forced them to move. I stepped forward into the circle of light, past the weeping rookie officer, and toward the bleeding man on my floor. My neat, orderly world had been shattered. Now, a man I'd never met, a man with a gun and the eyes of a surgeon, was ordering me to put my hands into the middle of the wreckage. And in that moment, all I could think was, "Okay, Josh, this is a new kind of project. Just listen to the man in charge and do exactly what he says." The thought was strangely calming. It was a procedure, a checklist. And if there was one thing I was good at, it was following a plan. My life depended on it. The governor's life depended on it. The world shrank to the space of a few square feet on my garage floor. The flashing lights, the shouting, the gawking neighbors, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. The only thing that mattered was Agent Cross's voice, a steady, low-pitched rudder in a sea of chaos. "Kneel here," he said, pointing to a spot beside the governor. I did, my knees protesting against the hard concrete. The smell of blood was overpowering. "Hands on mine," the medic said. "On 3 you take over, hard. Short breaths for him, steady voice from you, count, keep pressure, don't drift." I looked at his hands covered in crimson, pressing a thick wad of gauze into the governor's side. I nodded. My throat was too dry for words. "Okay, Mr. Dunham. On 3, 1, 2, 3, now." He pulled his hands away, and I pressed down. The feeling was awful. The gauze was saturated and spongy. I could feel the heat of the governor's body, the terrifying softness where there should have been firm muscle. I could feel the faint, desperate thump of his pulse against my palms. I pushed down, leaning my full body weight into it, just as the medic had instructed. The governor let out a pained hiss through his teeth. "Keep talking," he whispered. "Don't let me sleep." "You're not getting rid of me that easy," I said, leaning in. "You still owe me a handshake in a quiet neighborhood." "Good," the medic said. "Don't let up. No matter what, don't let up He was already moving on to his next task, pulling a tourniquet from his kit. It wasn't a standard one. It was a tactical model, designed for quick, one-handed application on a battlefield. But the angle was wrong, and the wound was on the torso, not a limb. A standard tourniquet wouldn't work. He cursed under his breath. "It's not gonna work. The pressure point is too high." He looked around, his eyes frantic. "I need something wide and strong. A belt. Anything." My eyes darted to my own waist. I was wearing a thick leather belt, one I'd had for 10 years. Solid. Dependable. "Mine," I grunted, the effort of pressing down making my voice tight. "Take mine?" Before he could answer, another hand appeared, holding out a belt. It was Tina's. She had slipped in beside me, her face pale but her eyes laser-focused. She must have run to our bedroom. She offered her own simple brown leather belt. It was narrower than mine, but it was right there. Agent Cross didn't hesitate. He snatched it. "Okay, this will have to do." "Keep that pressure," he ordered me. He looped the belt around the governor's torso, high up, trying to position it to constrict the artery feeding the wound. "Not how I plan to accessorize tonight," I said, and pressed harder. It was a desperate move, a field improvisation. As he worked, my mind started to clear. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, methodical anger. This wasn't an accident. The slip, the shot, that was a tragic mistake. But the reason that young, terrified officer was in my garage in the first place, with his heart pounding and his finger on the trigger, that was deliberate. That was Karen Paulson. She had called 911. She had lied. She must have said something terrible, something to provoke this kind of overwhelming, aggressive response. Bomb threat? Hostage situation? I wouldn't put anything past her. She saw me as a threat to her little kingdom, to the corrupt little empire she and that developer had built by cheating people like me, like neighbor Ed, like half the families on this lake. I had the proof in a briefcase sitting right on my workbench, the briefcase the governor had come here to collect, and Karen, in her infinite arrogance, had tried to stop it with a phone call. I risked a glance up. Tina was still beside me, a silent, steady presence. She wasn't looking at the governor or the frantic work of the agent. She was looking past them, out into the driveway, at the flashing lights and the cluster of confused cops. Then her eyes met mine. She held up her smartphone, the screen glowing in the dim light. She tilted it so I could see. On the screen was a live audio waveform, pulsing with the crackle and chatter of the police frequency. She had a scanner app. Of course she did. Our county still syncs body cams to the cruiser over on-scene Wi-Fi with the default password. Tina rolled her eyes, tapped connect, and mirrored. She loved this stuff. Then she swiped the screen. A new window opened. It was a video feed, jittery, chaotic, pointing down at a pair of boots on a concrete floor. It was body cam footage. My God, she'd found a way to tap into their local broadcast. Tina was a wizard with this kind of thing, always setting up our home network, mirroring screens, finding clever tech solutions for everyday problems. Now she was applying her hobby to a federal crime scene. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Her message was clear. She had it. She had the 911 call. She had the video from the shooter's perspective. She had the truth. A new kind of energy surged through me. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. We had been attacked in our home. A good man was bleeding out under my hands, and the person responsible was standing right across the street, watching, thinking she was untouchable. Tina mouthed 2 words to me, her expression grim but determined. "I've got it." In that moment, I knew this wasn't just about the governor anymore. It was about us. It was about taking back our lives, our home, from a woman who used lies as weapons. And my clever, brilliant wife had just handed us the ammunition. The only question was, in the middle of all this chaos, how in the world were we going to fire the first shot? Tina didn't wait for an invitation. She saw the situation for what it was, a battle of narratives. Right now, the official story was that a man had been shot during a police response at my house. To the outside world, I was the variable. I was the potential bad guy. Karen's lie, whatever it was the spark. The police response was the action. The shooting was the consequence. But Tina held the missing piece, the lie itself. She moved with a quiet purpose that I knew so well. It was the same focus she had when she was determined to win a board game or figure out a complicated recipe. She slipped back into the house, disappearing from the chaos of the garage. I kept my pressure on the governor's wound, my knuckles white, my arms starting to ache. Agent Cross had managed to rig the belt as a crude pressure bandage, but he still needed my direct force on the wound itself. The wail of an approaching siren grew louder. The ambulance was close. A moment later, the big screen television in our living room flickered to life. The living room was just off the garage, and I had left the connecting door wide open. The TV was mounted on the wall directly opposite that door, perfectly visible from the driveway, where the police and the growing crowd of neighbors were standing. Tina was screen mirroring her phone. The first thing that appeared on the big screen was the audio file of the 911 call. The first thing everyone heard, booming from our high-end soundbar, was the operator's calm, professional voice. 911, what is your emergency? Then came the reply, a voice that was instantly recognizable to everyone in the neighborhood. It was Karen Paulson, but it was a version of her we'd never heard before. It was hysterical, shrill, and full of lies. My neighbor, Josh Dunham, at 112 Willow Creek Lane. He's got rifles. I saw them, she shrieked into the phone. The audio, amplified by the soundbar, was crystal clear. Every lie, every bit of fake panic echoed through the night. He's meeting with some dangerous people. I think they're from a militia or something. They have bombs. I heard them talking about it. You have to get here now before they kill someone. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of neighbors. Neighbor Ed's jaw was on the ground. The patrol officers, the ones who had stormed my driveway ready for war, froze. Their faces were a mixture of shock and dawning horror. They had been sent in hot, expecting a heavily armed fanatic, based on the word of a woman who was now exposed as a complete fraud. They were looking at a guy in a t-shirt, a bleeding politician, and a classic car. There were no bombs. The only rifle in my house was a hunting rifle my grandfather had given me, and it was locked in a safe in the basement, collecting dust. But Tina wasn't done. The audio file ended, and the screen switched to video. It was the body cam footage. The footage from the young officer who had fired the shot. The entire cul-de-sac was now watching a first-person view of the event they had just witnessed. They saw the chaotic approach, the aggressive shouting. They saw the officer's feet moving forward onto my garage floor. They saw the sudden, dizzying lurch as he slipped on the oil. The camera spun wildly, pointing at the ceiling, then the floor. And then, for a split second, the horrifying, unintentional discharge of the weapon. The video was undeniable proof. It showed a tragic, clumsy accident, born not of malice, but of a volatile situation created by Karen's calculated deceit. The young officer, who was now sitting on the bumper of a patrol car with his head in his hands, didn't even look up. He was living his nightmare, and now the whole world was watching it on a giant TV. The effect was immediate and profound. The narrative didn't just shift, it shattered. The suspicion that had been hanging over me evaporated. The aggression drained out of the remaining officers, replaced by a grim, sullen understanding. They had been used. They were pawns in Karen Paulson's petty neighborhood war, and their mistake had nearly cost the governor his life. I glanced over at Karen. She was standing on her lawn, paralyzed, her face a ghostly white in the flashing lights. She was watching the TV, watching her lie being played back, watching her perfect, controlled world unravel in the high definition. She looked like a cornered animal. The ambulance screamed to a halt. Paramedics poured out, their movements professional and urgent. They took over from me and Agent Cross, expertly loading the governor onto a gurney. As they did, Agent Peters, the lead of the protection detail, walked over to me. He had been watching the television with a look of intense, grim satisfaction. He looked at the TV, then at Tina, who was now standing framed in the doorway, her arms crossed, looking like a warrior queen. He then looked at me, my hands and shirt stained with the governor's blood. He gave a single, sharp nod. It was a gesture of respect, of alliance. He knew without a doubt who the real enemy was here. He keyed his wrist microphone. "All stations, be advised," he said, his voice now calm and full of cold authority. The initial report of armed hostiles was a fabrication. Repeat, the call was a malicious fabrication. The scene is secure. The narrative is ours. For Karen, false report, inducing panic, obstruction, fraud, more coming, civil damages too. My lawyer started smiling in syllables. Tina murmured, "Smile, Karen, you're trending." And the neighbors' phones rose like sunflowers. They loaded the governor into the ambulance. Agent Peters turned to me. "You're coming with us, Mr. Dunham. So is that briefcase." He pointed to my workbench. "We need your statement. And we need that evidence." It wasn't a request. I looked at Tina. She nodded. "Go," she said. "I'll handle things here." Handling things. That meant calling our lawyer. It meant talking to the state police who were now arriving in force, their presence calm and professional compared to the local cops. And it probably meant dealing with a hysterical Karen Paulson. As I climbed into the back of a black SUV with Agent Peters, leaving the circus of my driveway behind, I knew this was far from over. We had exposed the lie, but the lie was just a symptom of the disease. The real fight was for the evidence in the briefcase on my lap. And I had a terrible feeling that the people we were up against wouldn't just give up because they'd been caught in a lie. They had too much to lose, and they were about to get very, very desperate. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of focused activity. I was in a follow car, a black SUV, with Agent Peters driving and Agent Cross in the passenger seat. My briefcase was on the seat beside me, a heavy, tangible weight. It felt like a bomb. The agents were quiet, speaking only in short, clipped sentences into their radios. They weren't panicked anymore. They were angry. A cold, professional rage that was far more intimidating than the shouting of the local cops. At the hospital, they didn't take us through the main emergency room. We were whisked through a private entrance, down a series of sterile white corridors, to a secure wing that I'm sure very few people even knew existed. The governor was taken into surgery immediately. The bullet had missed his vital organs, they told us. But there was a lot of damage. He was lucky. I was left in a small, windowless waiting room that smelled of bleach and anxiety. Agent Peters stayed with me. He didn't ask me questions. He just sat, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the door, as if he expected an army to burst through at any moment. After about an hour, a woman in a sharp suit came in. She introduced herself as the governor's chief of staff. She looked exhausted, but composed. She and Peters spoke in low tones for a few minutes, and then she turned to me. "Mr. Dunham," she said, her voice steady. "On behalf of the governor, I want to thank you. The medic said your quick action likely saved his life." I just nodded, unsure of what to say. "Thank you" didn't seem to fit. "We also need to talk about this," she said, gesturing to the briefcase I was clutching like a life raft. "We believe tonight's event was a direct result of the information you have in there." I took a deep breath. This was it. I opened the briefcase on the small coffee table. I wasn't a lawyer or an investigator, but I was a businessman. I understood paperwork. I understood numbers that didn't add up. "It's a simple land fraud scheme," I started, my voice hoarse. "But it's big." I laid out the documents one by one. First, the official county parcel map of our lakeside development. I pointed to the thin strips of land between each property, the areas designated as community access to the lake. "This is what we all bought into," I explained. "Every homeowner here has deeded access to the waterfront." Then I laid a second map beside it. It was a glossy, professionally printed map from our HOA. "This is the map Karen Paulson and the board have been using. It looks almost the same, but it's not." I used a pen to trace the lines. "They've been altered. The community access strips have been subtly shaved down, a few feet here, a few feet there. Those slivers of land have been attached to the parcel owned by the developer, a man named Richard Thorne." The chief of staff leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "Over the course of 50 properties," I continued, "those little slivers add up. They add up to a brand new, continuous private waterfront lot. A lot that doesn't legally exist, but one that Thorne was planning to sell for millions." "And the invoices?" she asked. I pulled them out next, dozens of them. Invoices from Thorne's development company to our HOA for absurd amounts. $20,000 for wetland mitigation consulting, $50,000 for shoreline erosion analysis, $100,000 for community beautifications project management. I tapped the papers. It's all padding. The work was never done, or it was done by a local kid for a few $100. The rest of the money, it was funneled into this. I showed them the last piece of the puzzle. The bank statements for a shell corporation. The name on the incorporation documents was Karen Paulson. The deposits perfectly matched the padded invoices. Kickbacks, plain and simple. She wasn't just an HOA president on a power trip, I concluded. She was Thorne's business partner. They were stealing our land and using our own HOA fees to do it. The governor was about to expose them. They got desperate. Agent Peters let out a low whistle. And she tried to use my guys to take you off the board before you could talk to us. The chief of staff looked at me, her expression hard as granite. They thought they were untouchable, she said, more to herself than to me. A small-time developer and a glorified neighborhood watch president. She stood up. Thank you, Mr. Dunham. You've given us everything we need. Agent Peters will see you to a secure room for a formal deposition. This evidence will not leave our sight. Agent Peters led me down another hallway. He was going to take me to the hospital's attached parking garage, where another car was waiting to transport me to a secure state police barracks. As we stepped into the concrete echo chamber of the garage, a man stepped out from behind a pillar. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He had the kind of smooth, easy smile that made you want to check your wallet. I recognized him from the developer's website, Richard Thorne. He held his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Gentlemen, please," he said, his voice like warm honey. "A terrible misunderstanding tonight. I just want to express my deepest sympathies for the governor." Agent Peters moved to stand slightly in front of me. "Mr. Thorne, this is an active investigation. You need to leave." Thorne's smile didn't falter, but his eyes were cold. They were fixed on the briefcase in my hand. "Of course," he said. "I just worry about Mr. Dunham. He's been through so much. Perhaps I could secure his personal effects for him. Just until this all blows over, it was a brazen, almost laughable attempt. He was trying to get the evidence, right here, right now." "That won't be necessary," I said, my voice flat. Thorne's smile finally vanished. His face hardened. "I insist," he said, and he lunged. He wasn't a fighter. He was a rich man used to getting his way. His move was a clumsy, desperate grab for the briefcase. But he was fast. He got a hand on the handle. Agent Peters moved to intercept him, but Thorne was unexpectedly strong. For a moment, it was a tug of war. My methodical, orderly brain took over. I didn't try to outmuscle him. I reacted. I let go of the handle with my right hand, pivoted on my back foot, and drove my left fist, the one still clenched from adrenaline, straight into his jaw. It wasn't a movie punch. It was short, sharp, and ugly. My knuckles connected with a crack. Thorne's head snapped to the side, his eyes wide with shock and pain. His grip on the briefcase loosened, and he staggered back, tripping over his own expensive shoes. He fell to the ground in a heap. "That's a no on express checkout," I told him, picking up the briefcase. The sound of running feet echoed through the garage. 2 state troopers who had been waiting by the exit came sprinting toward us, guns drawn. They saw Agent Peters, me standing over the groaning developer, and they didn't hesitate. They swarmed Thorne, pinning him to the concrete floor. As they cuffed him, Agent Peters looked at me, then at my scraped knuckles, and a slow grin spread across his face. "Nice right hook, Dunham," he said. I looked down at my hand. "It was my left," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a deep, trembling exhaustion in its wake. We had the man. We had the evidence. But as they hauled a cursing Richard Thorne to his feet, I knew this was just the fixer. The real snake, Karen, was still in her house, and taking her down was going to be a completely different kind of fight. The next few days were a blur of depositions, witness statements, and endless cups of bad coffee in sterile government offices. The state police had put Tina and me up in a hotel for our own safety, though it felt more like a comfortable prison. The governor was out of surgery and stable, which was a relief that felt physical, like a weight being lifted off my chest. The state's case against Thorne and Karen was building into an ironclad fortress. They had my evidence, they had Thorne's failed attempt to steal it, and they had Karen's fraudulent 911 call. The Attorney General's office was handling the big picture, the felony charges, the conspiracy, the attempted cover-up. But back at the lake, our own personal battle was far from over. The HOA board was in disarray, but the rules Karen had written were still in effect. And as far as the neighborhood was concerned, she was still president until she was formally charged and removed. It was Tina who decided we couldn't just wait. She was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, scrolling through a PDF of the HOA bylaws on her tablet. It was a document thicker than a phone book, a testament to Karen's obsession with control. "You know," she said, a wicked little glimmer in her eye that I knew all too well. "While the wheels of actual justice are turning, I feel like a little community standards enforcement is in order." I raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" She grinned. "Karen built this little kingdom with these rules. She used them as a weapon against everyone. It's time the weapon was aimed back at the throne." And so began Tina's campaign of glorious, lawful, petty revenge. It started small. Tina had a friend on the lake, another homeowner, who was fed up with Karen, drive by her house and take a few pictures. The first violation notice was emailed to the official HOA inbox with a carbon copy to every single homeowner. Subject: Notice of Violation. Bylaw 7.4. Exterior color, palette. "Dear Ms. Paulson," Tina had written in the most sterile, official language imaginable, "it has come to our attention that the decorative welcome sign on your porch is painted country blue. As per the approved community color palette outlined in Bylaw 7.4, only Patriot Blue or Midnight Blue are permitted. Please remedy this violation within 48 hours to avoid a daily fine of $25. The email included a high-resolution photo of the offending sign, with the color code helpfully circled. The community email chain lit up. People were confused at first. Then they started to realize what was happening. A few thumbs-up emojis appeared in the replies. The next day it was Bylaw 11.2, two-waste receptacle placement. Karen, in her haste and distress, had left her garbage and recycling bins at the curb for 3 hours past the designated 8 p.m. cutoff time. Another email went out, complete with a time-stamped photo. "A fine of $50 has been assessed to your account." This was followed by a citation for Bylaw 9.1, unseasonal decorations. A small decorative flag with a pumpkin on it, left over from the previous fall, was still hanging from her mailbox. "Please be advised that autumnal decorations are only permitted between September 15th and November 30th. A fine of $15 will be assessed." Each email was a work of art, a perfect imitation of the cold, condescending notices Karen had been sending out for years. Tina was using Karen's own words, her own rules, her own fee structure against her. And she was doing it all legally, by the book Karen herself had written. While Tina was waging her war of 1,000 paper cuts, I was taking the more direct route. I spent my days on the phone with the state investigators, but I also spent my evenings drafting formal complaints to the Rump HOA board. I filed a motion for an emergency meeting to discuss the president's conduct. I submitted a formal request under the HOA's own transparency rules for all financial records for the past 5 years. I sent a registered letter demanding access to the minutes of every board meeting where the developers' contracts were discussed. I was burying them in the one thing they couldn't fight: procedure. They had always used bureaucracy to shield their corruption. I was now using it to expose them. The breaking point came about a week into our campaign. We were back home, the state police having finally decided the threat was contained. We were sitting on our porch when we saw Karen storm out of her house. She marched across her lawn and stood at the edge of our property, her face blotchy and her hair a mess. She had clearly snapped. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Sending me these stupid emails, fining me for my flag." Tina and I just sat there, sipping our iced tea. We didn't say a word. Her meltdown was magnificent. "I am this HOA. I built this community. You are nothing," she raged, her voice echoing across the quiet lake. What she didn't know was that our neighbor Ed, the retired accountant and bylaw enthusiast, had recently installed a new top-of-the-line video doorbell. A doorbell with a crystal-clear microphone and a wide-angle lens. A doorbell that was, at that very moment, recording Karen's entire unhinged screaming tirade. Later that evening, a new email landed in every homeowner's inbox. This one was from Ed. The subject line was simple: concerning behavior. The body of the email contained nothing but a video link. The footage of Karen, wild-eyed and shrieking about how she was the HOA, was the final nail in the coffin of her neighborhood authority. You can't rule a community that has seen you, stripped of all your power, having a full-blown tantrum on your neighbor's lawn. The next morning, I got a call from one of the other board members, a quiet man who had always seemed intimidated by Karen. "Josh," he said, his voice shaky, "we're holding the emergency meeting. We're voting her out, and we're opening the books, all of them." It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it felt huge. We had fought back not with threats or violence, but with their own rule book and a well-placed doorbell camera. Karen thought her power came from her title, from her ability to intimidate, but we were showing everyone that real power came from the truth, and her truth, now playing on a loop in an email attachment, was that she was just a bully who had finally been stood up to. The foundation of her little kingdom was crumbling, and the main quake was yet to come. The call came from the Attorney General's office. They were ready. They had subpoenaed the developer's bank records, Karen's personal finances, and the server logs from the HOA's management company. They had taken my neat little folder of evidence and built it into a mountain. They asked me to come in one last time, to walk their lead investigators through the whole thing, from start to finish. They wanted to make sure they understood every detail before they presented it to the grand jury. It felt like a final exam. I walked into a large conference room with a long table and a projection screen at one end. The room was filled with serious people in suits who did not look like they enjoyed a good joke. The chief of staff was there, along with the lead state police investigator. They all nodded at me grimly. "Mr. Dunham," the lead prosecutor said, "walk us through it." As if we know nothing, I took a deep breath and plugged my laptop into their system. I was in my element now. This was no different than presenting a project plan to a nervous client. It was about making the complex simple. It was about telling a clear story with facts. "Gentlemen, ladies," I began, and the first image popped up on the screen. It was the official county parcel map, crisp and clear. Everything starts here, with the land. This is the legal, recorded reality of our community. I used a laser pointer to trace the boundaries, highlighting the public access easements. These are the promises that were made when we bought our homes. Access to the lake, a shared community resource. Then I clicked to the next slide. It was Karen's altered HOA map, the one from their welcome packet. I superimposed it over the county map. The differences, once you knew where to look, were glaring. The red lines of the fraudulent map bled over the green lines of the legal one. "This is the lie," I said, my voice steady. "A lie told a few feet at a time. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. Each homeowner loses a little, so little they might not even notice. But the developer, Richard Thorne, he gains a lot. I switched to a 3D rendering I had built using a simple architectural program. It showed the slivers of stolen land coalescing into a single, prime, buildable lot right on the water. He wasn't just stealing land. He was manufacturing a multi-million-dollar asset out of thin air, using the HOA as his cover. Next, I moved to the money, the flow of it. I put up a spreadsheet. On one side was a list of every inflated invoice from Thorne Development to the HOA. "Here's the mechanism for the theft," I said, pointing to the outrageous numbers. $50,000 for algae assessment, $75,000 for dock stability review. These are phantom services. The money went from our HOA accounts directly to Thorne's company. I clicked again, and a second column of numbers appeared on the screen. These were from the bank records of Karen's shell company, the one named Lakefront Solutions LLC. And here is the kickback. For every dollar the HOA overpaid Thorne, roughly 50 cents ended up here. I drew lines connecting the payments. A $50,000 invoice was followed a week later by a $25,000 deposit. A $100,000 invoice was followed by a $48,000 deposit. It was a clear, undeniable pattern. She wasn't just a corrupt HOA president, I explained. She was the developer's local partner. She used her position to suppress dissent, to approve his plans without question, and to funnel him money from the community's own coffers. In return, he paid her handsomely. I put up a final slide. It was a picture of a signature. This is Karen Paulson's signature from an HOA document. Beside it, I put up a picture of the signature on the incorporation papers for Lakefront Solutions, LLC. They were identical. Then I added a third signature. "This last one," I said, my voice dropping a little, "is from the witness signature line on one of Thorne's land purchase documents. It's the signature of the county planning commissioner who approved Thorne's initial development plan 10 years ago. The three signatures were a perfect match. Karen hadn't just been running this scam as HOA president. She had been Thorne's inside woman from the very beginning, a plant in the county office who got him the approvals he needed. The room was silent. The investigators were just staring at the screen, scribbling notes. The lead prosecutor finally leaned back in his chair. So she approves his plans at the county level, then gets herself elected HOA president to manage the project from the inside, stealing land and money the whole time. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. One of the other investigators, a woman from the white-collar crime unit, pointed at one of the kickback deposits. "That routing number," she said. "It's from an offshore account. We've seen Thorne use that bank before to hide money on his last failed project in the mountains. This isn't just fraud, it's money laundering." Racketeering. My simple little investigation into a stolen strip of land had spiraled into a massive criminal conspiracy. The chief of staff looked at me. "Mr. Dunham, the governor was right. You didn't just untangle something. You pulled on one loose thread and unraveled their entire criminal enterprise." I just nodded, feeling a profound sense of relief. It was out of my hands now. I had given them the map, the numbers, and the motive. I had done my part. The prosecutor stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Dunham. That's all we need." As I was packing up my laptop, the state police investigator walked over to me. "You know," he said quietly, "we've been looking at Thorne for years. Always knew he was dirty, but he was slick. We could never find a crack. You didn't just find the crack, you drove a truck through it. I thought about that. All I did was stand up for my property. I followed the paperwork. I refused to be bullied. It turned out, sometimes that's all it takes to bring down an empire." As I left the building, I knew that warrants were being drawn up. Arrests were imminent. The quiet, orderly life I loved was on the horizon. But first, there was going to be one last, very public storm. The night before the HOA meeting, the air had the feeling of a gathering storm. The state police investigator had called me. "Be at the clubhouse tomorrow at 9 a.m., he'd said. "It's going to be a show." The emergency meeting I had formally requested was happening. The agenda was simple: a vote of no confidence in President Karen Paulson and a motion to open all financial records for a full, independent audit. The remaining board members, stripped of Karen's domineering presence, had folded completely. They had sent out the notice, and the entire community was buzzing. After the video of Karen's meltdown went public, her few remaining supporters had gone silent. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of this. Tina and I walked to the community clubhouse the next morning. It was a crisp, beautiful day. The lake was sparkling. It felt like the kind of day for a fresh start. The clubhouse was packed. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. I saw neighbor Ed in the front row, holding a copy of the bylaws like it was a holy text. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. At the front of the room, the three remaining board members sat at a folding table, looking nervous. Karen Paulson was there, sitting at the head of the table. She was dressed impeccably, her hair perfect, a mask of calm, icy composure plastered on her face. She was going to try to brazen it out, to stare down the entire community and pretend that nothing was wrong. It was a bold move. It was also a foolish one. The meeting started. The acting vice president, a nervous man named Frank, called the meeting to order. He could barely get the words out. "The first item on the agenda," he stammered, "is a motion of no confidence in our president, Karen Paulson." Karen stood up. She held up a hand, a gesture meant to command silence and respect. "Now, I know there have been some unfortunate rumors and a great deal of misinformation spread by certain disgruntled individuals," she began, her eyes flicking toward me. "But I am here to assure you that I have always acted in the best interests of this community." She was about to launch into what I'm sure was a well-rehearsed speech about fiscal responsibility and protecting property values. She never got the chance. The main doors of the clubhouse swung open. 2 uniformed state troopers stepped inside, followed by the lead investigator in his suit. They moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose that silenced the room instantly. Everyone turned to look. The investigator held up a piece of paper. "Karen Paulson," he said, his voice calm and clear, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Karen's face went white. The mask of composure didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. She looked like she had been struck by lightning. I don't understand," she stammered. "You are under arrest," the investigator said, continuing his slow walk toward the table, "for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." The troopers came up behind her. One of them took her arm gently but firmly. "Please stand up, ma'am." Karen just stared, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. The entire room was in a state of stunned silence. This was better than a movie. This was real. This was the queen of the neighborhood being dethroned in the most public and humiliating way possible. At the same moment, I knew other teams were moving. Another set of investigators was at Thorne's gleaming corporate office downtown. A third was at the County Planning Commission, arresting the commissioner who had been on Thorne's payroll for a decade. It was a coordinated, synchronized takedown of their entire corrupt network. They pulled Karen's arms behind her back, and the sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoed in the silent room. The sound seemed to break the spell. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, which quickly grew into loud, excited chatter. Some people started to clap. Neighbor Ed was on his feet, applauding vigorously. As the troopers began to lead a now catatonic Karen toward the door, her treasurer, a man who had signed off on every fraudulent check, started to look pale. The investigator paused and turned to him. "Arthur Jennings, you're under arrest as well." For the same charges, another set of troopers materialized and cuffed him right there at the table. The third board member looked like he was about to faint. They walked Karen right past me. Her eyes, which had been vacant with shock, suddenly focused on my face. The shock was replaced by a flash of pure, venomous hatred. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect suburban matriarch was gone. What was left was ugly and raw. "You!" she hissed, her voice a low, vicious snarl. "You have no idea what you've done. You've ruined everything." I just looked at her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I mostly felt a profound sense of pity. She had built a life on lies, and now the truth was taking it all away. "No, Karen," I said, my voice quiet. "You did. You ruined everything." Her face contorted with rage, but the troopers pulled her along, out the door, and into the bright morning sun, where a marked state police car was waiting. The last I saw of her was her perfect hair being slightly mussed as she was pushed into the back of the car. The door slammed shut, and just like that, her reign was over. The room erupted in cheers, a wave of collective relief and celebration. The war was over. The bad guys had lost. And all that was left was to start the long, quiet process of rebuilding. The weeks that followed were quiet. Sirens faded. Paperwork did not. Karen Paulson and Richard Thorne were booked. The county commissioner and HOA treasurer, too. Accounts frozen. Subpoenas everywhere. A court appointed a receiver to untangle the HOA and restore the stolen lake access. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood. About a month later, the governor's office called. He wanted to see us. Tina and I drove into the city and were shown into a sunlit study. Governor Thompson looked thinner and stiff but clear-eyed. He smiled. "Josh, Tina, come in. The doctors say I'm lucky," he said. "They also say if you hadn't pressed that wound, my luck ends on your garage floor. Thank you is too small, but thank you." "I just did what your man told me," I said. "You kept your head in a storm," he countered. He turned to Tina. "And you, my staff told me about your broadcast. Protection is still talking about it. You grabbed the story before we knew there was one. That's a gift." He briefed us. Internal affairs ruled the rookie's shot, a tragic accident under extreme duress, fueled by a malicious false report. The kid was off patrol, retraining, counseling. "Pawns get hurt when the wicked play games," the governor said. Then to me, "Your files didn't just nail a lake scam. Thorne spread money like fertilizer, campaigns, permits, favors. You didn't only save your block. You handed us a broom." Driving home, the world felt level again. The cul-de-sac was quiet. Ed watered petunias and waved like nothing historic had happened on our concrete. That night, I went to the garage. The Mustang gleamed under the fluorescence. The floor was spotless. I'd scrubbed and resealed it. No blood, no tape, no ghosts. Just tools on pegs and order on a slab. My church. What makes someone untouchable? Karen and Thorne thought titles and money made them fog. Untouchable is a story bullies tell themselves, until paper and truth show up. a parcel map, a bank statement, a belt and a steady hand, a wife with a scanner app, and a mean streak for petty justice. That's what touched them. The receiver posted real books online. Refunds began. The board called a special election, minus Karen and her chorus. Ed, of course, chaired finance like a happy hawk. Neighbors walked the reopened access path and remembered why we moved here. Water, pines, quiet. A letter arrived from the governor, formal thanks, and a handwritten line. The state owes you a favor. Call it when you need it. I set it in the top drawer, under the torque certificates. Good paper to keep. Charges stacked, conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, false report, inducing panic, obstruction. Thorne tried to lawyer his way into daylight and found only more charges. The commissioner resigned with a statement that said, "Regret 6 times," and meant none of them. Deals would be cut, time would be served, property would be restored, not fast, but moving. One evening, Tina leaned on the doorframe while I tuned the carb. Thinking big thoughts? Smaller this time, I said. Idle, timing, then a drive. She slid a thick envelope onto the bench. Return receipts poked out like white flags. What's that? Proof our mailers hit, she said. Every bylaw notice we sent Karen, signed for. I laughed. Peace, I said. And postage, she added. I turned the key. The Mustang caught, settled into the low, certain growl that makes the world hold still. Outside, the lake went dark and calm. Inside, the tools hung exactly where they belonged. Tina watched me with that look that means we won without gloating. What are you thinking about? She asked. Nothing, I said, and meant it. Absolutely nothing. And after everything, that was the best feeling in the world.